I would like to call upon the stage our Commissioner Advocate Rory Vola, just to give us context from him as the accounting executive of our organization, not only about our existence here in this breakfast seminar, but also where we've come regarding this issue of beneficial ownership. Commissioner? And he's my boss, you can clap for him, please.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Special welcome to our speaker, Mr. Mamoniat from Treasury, a good friend of mine for many years, who leads the charges from the countryside as far as our grey listing is concerned. We just had big discussions about that now. Thank you very much for making the time. We know how busy you are. We're not quite there yet, but we should know very soon about where we are as far as that process is concerned. But we remain confident. Please forgive me if I sound a bit croaky. I'm coming out with a flu. I've been traveling for 27 hours, and I think I've picked up something along the way. Just on a quick, on the side of why we are in a very small group, as you can see, we only invite about 40 people. Things doesn't look like 40 picture up. Oh, somebody there. We only invite very few people. Those who are quite interested in the industry and what we belong and where we are as far as CIPC is concerned, and those who are quite involved in the BO space. As you know, when we were grey listed, there was a lot of pressure on our side of CIPC to develop what is called a beneficial ownership register. And we had a lot of toing and throwing discussions about how we're going to do it and the like. And eventually we had to develop one very, very quickly. We managed to do that and to receive quite a number of filings. We received somewhere in the region of about how many, Joey? About 2 million filings, somewhere there, which is quite an extensive amount of filings that we've had. And we're quite proud of the fact that when the FATF did a review on us, and especially on the 5.1, which is the immediate outcome 1 and immediate outcome 2 deficiencies as per the grey listing, as per the last meeting that I had a few months ago, that particular outcome was upgraded to largely addressed. So we're quite proud of the fact that we met that standard and we managed to make sure that as part of what we are responsible for at CIPC, we're able to deal with our grey listing deficiency aspect. The one thing that we knew from the start was that the system that we developed at that time was not the most efficient one. But we were pressurized for time, and my IT guys were very pressurized for time, and I have a great IT team. They managed to develop and get a system up and running in order for us to have filings so that we can prove to the FATF that we have a viable stakeholder base and stakeholder numbers and data coming through as far as the database registry of BO is concerned. So we had to go and develop something new because we said after a while that the CIPC as an entity faces a multitude of challenges, but when it comes to the issue about, let's just talk about BO and other aspects related to registry work, we face 2 challenges. The one challenge is that CIPC is a regulator, first and foremost. A lot of people think about us as being more of an administrative body, but by and large, we regulate aspects of the company law and the Companies Act, and we regulate aspects of governance. And we regulate aspects of legislative changes when they allow us to be part of that ecosystem, right? Legislation. And was part of that ecosystem of change. So we had to come and develop that, and therefore we had to meet the first challenge of being a regulator. But the second part, and the part that people judge us the most for, is not that part. They judge us the most for how easy it is to comply. All right, we know we've got all of these rules and we know that you're a regulator, but most and foremost is that CIPC make it easier for us to interact and transact and comply with what the legislation says. So those are the challenges, right? Sometimes it's hard to meet that challenge because being a regulator and large is like coming with a big stick and regulating you and you must comply. And we take that aspect very, very seriously. But the second part is that ease of doing business, taking the country forward, lowering of bureaucracy, lowering of red tape is what we must be known for, okay? And that's the reason why we try to be an innovative institution regarding that. So that is where the BO aspect of trying to meet that double change, regulate. And myself and Joey had many discussions about this. Sometimes we were at the precipice of understanding about how do we meet the FATF standard of regulating, but also have this whole cohort of industry and stakeholders who are saying, CIPC, what are you doing? You know what I mean? You've added more complexity to the way that we need to comply. You've added more stuff that we need to do as far as our annual returns is concerned. We introduced something called the hard stop, as you all know, which was very unpopular. And I think to a large degree, it's still unpopular. But unfortunately, we had government and cabinet on our back to say, meet the standard of beneficial ownership registry, IO51, and make sure that you allow that data to be passed and accessed speedily, timely, efficiently to law enforcement, IO52. All right? And we have, by and large, met that standard. But we don't rest on our laurels at the CIPC. We say, look, now that we've met the standard, and we've just come out of a meeting a month ago at the FIC where we had to give further commitment to the FATF to make them say that not only are we meeting your standard, but we give you commitment, but going forward, we will continue to meet that and grow it. We had to go about and do that. All right? But so we had to introspect. And the introspection is that going back to the part about regulating and ease of doing business, we had to go and say, but now that we have met the standard, how do we make it easier for them to comply even more? And we're going to show you that. Okay? We've launched that this weekend. Soft launched it, I think. And soft launched it, or is it open launch? Open launch, okay. So we've launched it completely. All right, and I've just got some stats now from my CTO, Anand. And as of today, we've received, over the weekend, today's Monday, we launched it on Friday, we've received just under 2,000 new filings on the new platform, which is great. It means that it's working. We're going to have our teething problems. We always have our teething problems, and the industry is going to shout at stakeholders, and I'm going to receive a multitude of emails. I've always received this. But by and large, the system is working. So us meeting the second part about the ease of doing business and making sure that we continue to innovate on our platforms and our systems to make it easier for you is certainly something that we take very, very seriously, and hopefully we'll make that challenge again. So we're here to hear how best we can do certain aspects of it. We're also here to understand that when it gets to our October crunch time and we get from FATF, that we hope some good news, that we're out of the grey listing. So we continue to improve on our systems. As I said, we don't always get everything right. I'll be the first to admit that, right? But the one thing that we try always is that we don't just say that, well, there's a system that seems to be working, because I could have just kept the BO system the way that it is, right? 2 million filings. And the global standard, that's massive, right? We're more than countries like India, Joey? Country of India of 1 billion plus people, we've received more filings than them. All right, many jurisdictions we've received more filings than them. So I could have just left the system, right? But that's not the way that we work at the CIPC. We try to always get things better, because we do understand that as a economy and as a government that faces a multitude of challenges, we must play our part in our small little way to make sure that we're not part of the problem of inefficiency. And not all the time do we get it right. I continue to reiterate that point, but we continue to try, most importantly, okay? And therefore, hopefully you can see this from the aspect of making the PO system better, that we are certainly trying. So the one last part that I want to stress before I close, we won't be here too long. I think by 11 o'clock or so we should have wrapped up. We're just here to feel the waters, make sure our system works, ask as many questions as you like. But the one thing that I want to stress is that what is the reason for PO, right? The reason for PO is corporate transparency. The world has moved and shifted so much that people want to know who they are interacting with, who they are doing business with, who is in the back end of what we are doing and who we are contracting with. The whole world has shifted. I remember the last time we had a similar seminar, we had Michael Katz discussing this aspect, a good friend of mine, and we continue to debate the whole area about corporate transparency and corporate law. The basis for corporate law was built on corporate transparency, because the nature of a company is not a human being, right? You don't know who you're transacting with. You're transacting with a form that has no body. So you have to bring in certain aspects of transparency, knowing. That's why registries are there. That's why CIPC exists, to put you on a register, to know who you are. It's like Home Affairs has an ID, okay? The same thing for companies. But together with that goes corporate transparency, right? knowing who we are contracting with. Many people don't like this idea. Saf and Momo were discussing it earlier. Some jurisdictions have gone the whole gamut. They've gone the whole cohort. They've brought everything and said you must know exactly what it is. We're talking about Scandinavian countries and the like. So we play a balancing role. For us now, it's law enforcement. Could change, but for now, law enforcement has access to those registers. And we try to work very closely with our banking partners because we firmly believe they play a massive role in the ecosystem of transparency, and therefore we would like to see that more enhanced. That's where this regulatory role of CIPC also comes into play, all right? Corporate transparency and openness to understand who you are transacting with. Also, with a country with a multitude of problems as far as corruption is concerned, we read about it every single day. It just doesn't stop. IDT, just now, lady getting caught for bribery it just doesn't stop, right? These type of things. Papita Diokran just gone because of massive corruption at Tambisa Hospital and the like. That's why we need to play this part of understanding where are these procurement rules and where is its corporate transparency, and BO plays a part in that. Because in terms of IO5.2, law enforcement have access to the data to understand who is behind all of this, so that when they investigate, they understand who is responsible. Hopefully. We do understand crooks are clever. Not all of them put themselves on our register. We do know that. But if you triangulate the data, and I'm very much passionate about triangulating of data, as many of you might know, we will soon get a picture of the version of the truth. If more of us transact as government and the private sector and make sure that we have full data sets and get those data sets out and open so people can scrutinize them. I like the UK version of events. The UK always has open registries, right? But they say more eyes on the register, more people can scan them and see there's something wrong. All right? We have a good level of openness. Our register is an open one as well. Not our PO, but I mean our corporate register is an open one. And therefore, we start triangulating and putting all the data into one piece. We'll start seeing who is responsible for what. And that's the part of us regulating efficiently. But once again, I reiterate the point, you must regulate, but you must also make sure that it's easier for industry and stakeholders to comply. And that's the reason why we're here. Thank you very much.
I think those round of applause could be much better. Can we please give the Commissioner a round of applause? Thank you very much, Commissioner. I think if you were listening attentively, the Commissioner gave you the secret to CIPC, that you regulate, but you try and do it efficiently. You regulate and you try and make it easy for the person that you are regulating to comply with what you expect of them. And I think having that kind of view is quite refreshing, that not only do you come with a stick as far as what legislation requires you to do, but you do it in a manner of understanding how can you make it plausible for the person that you are regulating to not be scared of your regulation, but rather find it conducive to give you as a regulator what you require from them. And I found that to be quite refreshing. At this point, we're basically going to get into why we're here. We're going to have a look at the demonstration of the optimized beneficial ownership process. There's two versions of the demonstration that we are going to give a look at. One being that we know that our private company space is possibly our biggest number on our registry, so that'll be our first video. And our non-profit would then be our second demo as another optimized process to try and make things a bit simpler for our public. When you look at the video, don't only look in awe, but also, because we know we did a great job. That much we do know. However, look also from an eye of how can you also assist us in making this thing even far better than what it is now. The other secret the Commissioner told you of today is very generous. He's told you about the triangulation of data. It tells you where we are going as an organization. So when you look at this, don't see it as just the front end of collecting information, but also as a stepping stone of being a much more effective and efficient regulator. So we're going to start with our first video, the optimization of BO for the private company. Good day and welcome to the Simplified Beneficial Ownership Filing Process. For this application, we're going to look at an unaffected company that is also a private company. Logging on to the CIPC services, you're going to log on as per usual using the customer code and password, as well as completing the security code as provided on the web page. Once you have completed the customer code and password and logging on, the landing page, as per usual, will confirm that companies linked to the ID number appearing on the customer code. We would draw your attention to the top right-hand corner where you would then select transact. So you will click on transact. The web page will refresh where a bouquet of CIPC online services will be presented to you. Now, from the bouquet of services, we are going to draw your attention to the bottom of the screen. So the second last box at the bottom where the beneficial ownership option appears, you're going to select there by clicking on beneficial ownership. On the following landing page, you will have a declaration to read and agree to. Declaration confirming that you are authorized and mandated to file information, beneficial information to the CIPC on behalf of the filing entity. After reading and agreeing to the declaration, you will tick the box next to the I agree by ticking the box and selecting continue. On this page, confirms any application that's in process, rejected, or completed applications. To facilitate a new filing, you will scroll down to the bottom of the page and click on new. The page will refresh where it gives you a list of companies that appear with the ID number of the customer code holder, or you can use the search functionality at the bottom. This page confirms the company information, the name, number, and the type of entity, also confirming the contact details that the OTP will be sent to for the facilitation of this BO filing. You will just scroll down to the bottom and select continue. We now are going to land on the beneficial ownership page, where you would need to select if the company is an affected or non-affected. On the right-hand side, there's a guidance notice there advising what is the requirements for an affected company. On the ownership questions, you will just select yes or no. The first question being, does one person hold securities for the beneficial interest of another natural person? You would answer yes or no. The second, is there a person except the director or member who exercises any influence or has control over the company or close corporation? The third, is there a person except the director or members with the right to appoint and remove directors of the company? And the fourth being, is there a person except the director or members that has the ability to materially influence the management of the declaring company or close corporation? By answering those questions between yes and no, you will then click on continue. And the ownership question continues that the number of directors or members of the declaring entity are 10 or less. Then you would select a yes or no. The landing page on security registry where the beneficial owner appears, you will then go to the far right under the edit option and select edit. A summary of that specific beneficial owner information will appear where some information is masked out. What you need to complete on this page would be the date interest issued, meaning the date that the benefit or the shares or the interest was acquired or issued to the specific beneficial owner. You will then capture the number of securities issued and the share class of those specific securities. You will then go down to the bottom and save the information. Once the information is captured, you will then select the continue option, where it will give you a summary of information that was completed on the previous page, being the number of securities, the date issued, as well as the class of the security. You will then select continue. At this stage, we would have reached the OTP stage, where it confirms the contact details the OTP is sent to. And next to the beneficial owner's information, there's a red box there with a cross confirming that the OTP is not confirmed as yet. At the bottom there, kindly note you have an option of completing an OTP received either on your cell phone via SMS or an OTP received via email.
So we'll just complete the information there as a via SMS. Once the OTP is completed, you will then click on verify for the information to be verified if the OTP is correct. And if it is correct, on the far right hand side of the beneficial owner information, the box would have now turned into a green box with a tick. And it's important to then select and click on finish to conclude the application. Once the application is concluded, the filer will then receive a filing notification confirming the filing of this specific beneficial ownership application on behalf of this entity. We've reached the end of the demo. Thank you very much.
Now that deserves a round of applause. No, we can do better than that. We can do better than that. That covers the first demo for a private company that's an unaffected entity. You will notice, obviously, on the questions that are being asked there is what helps determine the direction the filing would have to go if you are filing for any entity. So based on the answers that you give is what then informs the system which route your filing would need to take. So please keep those questions and keep those notes. After this, we're going to have a round of questions or comments regarding the system before we continue to our key speaker. So now we're just going to look at the non-affected company, which happens to be a non-profit company demo.
Good day and welcome to the simplified beneficial ownership filing process for a non-affected company that also happens to be a non-profit company. The logging on the CIPCE services will be as per usual, using your customer code and password to be able to access our CIPCE services. It is also important to make sure that the security code provided is completed as seen, as the security code is case sensitive. Once you have logged on using your customer code and password, the page will refresh where you would now be on a landing page that lists the number of companies that have got the same ID number registered on them as the customer code being used. We would then draw your attention to the top right-hand corner of the web page, where we would like you to then select Transact. Once you've selected Transact, the web page will refresh where a list of CIPC's online services would then be provided to you. We'll draw your attention to the bottom of those options, to the option beneficial ownership, and that is the one that you will click and select, of which the web page will then refresh, and the landing page you start on with would be the declaration. Basically, the declaration confirming that as the filer, you are authorized and mandated to file beneficial ownership information on behalf of the entity that you will be filing for. Once you've read and agreed to the declaration, you will tick the box next to the agree and then select continue. On this page that you've landed on now will confirm either applications that are in process, rejected, or completed applications. To start a new application, you will scroll down to the bottom and you will then select new. The following page that you would land on will give you a list of companies that have got the same ID number appearing on them as the customer code. You are able to select the company from the list of companies, or you are also welcome to use the enterprise search function at the bottom of the page. Once you've searched for the company, you are now on enterprise confirmation, which confirms the type of entity, the name and the registration number, as well as the contact details where the OTP will be sent to facilitate the filing of this beneficial ownership submission. You can then just proceed by selecting and clicking on continue. The beneficial ownership registry now confirms the company name and number. You would select affected or non-affected company. On the right-hand side, there's a guide confirming what is an affected company. Ownership questions: does one person hold securities for the beneficial interest of another natural person? You would just select yes or no. Is there a person who exercises any influence or control over the company or the closed corporation, excluding the members or directors? Is there a person with the right to appoint and remove directors of the company, excluding the directors and the shareholders? And the last one being, is there a person or persons that has the ability to materially influence the management of the declaring company? And you can answer those questions simply with a yes or no. The following question that it will ask you is the number of directors and members of the declaring entity, are they 10 or less? You would select either a yes or no to that. Then you can continue to proceed. Because we're dealing with a non-profit company, the bare minimum is that you would have at least 3 directors appearing. So you will then make use of the edit function next to each of the director information for it to open their information. Here you will just capture the date interest issued for that specific director or beneficial owner. You will select the date by maneuvering and moving on the calendar provided. The type of mandate, you have an option to select between control and interest, and you will quantify the interest by merely typing the amount in there. You will then select save to save the information, and you will follow the same process for the remaining 2 directors. The information will come up. You will maneuver on the calendar to then select the date interest issued for this specific one. Select the member type, either of interest or control in the company. You will then proceed to the bottom to save, and you will do so for the 3rd director. By clicking on the edit function, the information opens. You confirm the date interest issued by maneuvering on the calendar and selecting the member type, being it interest or control, as we are dealing with a non-profit company. You quantify the interest, and then you will then proceed to select save. Once captured for all of the appearing 3 directors on the company, you would then select continue. On this page, it gives you a confirmation summary of the information captured on the previous page for those directors, being the member interest type, the issue date, as well as the quantified interest value. You will then select continue to proceed. We have now reached the OTP page. And on OTP, the filer would be the one who will then send the OTP. You will then notice that there's a red box with a cross there to confirm that the OTP is not confirmed or verified as yet. You would then just complete the OTP, knowing that you either have an option of either completing an OTP received from your cell phone or an OTP received via email. Once verified, you will get a green tick confirming that the OTP has been accepted. It is important to then proceed to select finish to then conclude the application. Once the application is concluded, the filer will then receive a confirmation email confirming the submission of the beneficial ownership declaration for this non-profit company. We've reached the end of the demo. Thank you very much.
Once again, it's not worth stating how much good work our ICT has done with this application. And I did confirm in the first video that we know we did a great job. But we also like to get some reflections from the floor, if there are any comments or questions that we might have regarding the process that the system itself follows, or concept behind how the system flow has gone for this application. Just by a raise of hands, we would then bring the mic to you. Right. Out of some time doing this job, we get to learn at this point that it's either you did a very good job, that there's no questions or comments, and oh, there is one. Oh, or they're at the back. You will just introduce yourself, and after that, state the question.
Good morning. My name is Nonhlanhla Sithole. I'm from PKF Octagon, Chartered Accountants. I'm the associate for the company secretarial division. This looks very fantastic, but we're hoping for a much more easier way to file the beneficial ownership, especially for the small companies where it's really owner managed. We're hoping to have a button where they declare that nothing has changed from last year, which makes it easy because most of us have really had to invest so much money and time, both to comply with FIC and CIPC. So actually time is a bit of money, you know? So really that's the first point. And then the second one would be, we have concerns from our foreign shareholders whereby they question the security of the information and data that is shared with CIPC. So the question also comes to what extent do you actually look at all the registers that you receive? Do you actually make sure that they are correct or not? And then lastly, based on what has been shown on the NPCs, with Section 30 of the Income Tax Act, obviously you can't have connected person. So it's not an element of just control and interest. There's also influence, because if husband and wife start an NPC, they can't both be members or directors of that NPC. But behind the scenes, there's that element of influence. How do we then take there?
Thank you very much for that. With that question, it makes me very confident that we've got the right people in the room. When they ask a question and they mention a section of the act, then we really have the right people in the room. We had another hand this side. Oh yeah, thank you.
Hi, good day. My name is Millie Lurie. I'm a representative of the Gauteng Attorneys Association, and I also serve on the Pretoria Attorneys Association. My question just relates to the beneficial ownership declaration for a non-profit company, because as we're aware, in terms of Section 10 of the Companies Act, read with Schedule 1, you have non-profit companies with members and non-profit companies without members. In the case of a private company, it's a little bit easier because you have a question of securities and shareholding. In a non-profit company without members, where the directors have full control in the way in which the organization is run, how do you determine, we just want to know, how do you calculate the interest in the case of influence or control? So I think my question just relates to, how do you insert the points or the interest percentage?
Hundreds. Once again, we are through with the Section 10. Lucinda, could I indulge you to comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to stand up to speak to the first question on where there are beneficial owners or an interest outside, like married, husband and wife, etc. What we need to remember is this simplified system focuses on non-affected companies without beneficial ownership. So the moment, that's why those 4 ownership questions are so important. The moment that you select yes to an ownership question, that there is someone that has control over your entity, there is someone outside of the directors or members, there is someone that has an interest in terms of this entity, this optimized system will point you directly to the normal existing BO system. So that's how this is optimization of our non-affected entities without beneficial ownership. And that's why the ownership questions are so important. Melly, to talk to your question, again, when there are NPCs with members or without members, and it's only control that's applicable, that's where they will select control, because the directors are in control and we already have that information. The reason why we did this is we can populate and extract the director information from our records. So the securities register or members register is going to be automatically populated based on the information that they submit and that is extracted from our records. The moment that there is beneficial interest in terms of members, it's going to point you to the normal BO declaration platform. Yes. So interest type that is indicated there is not a percentage for this system. It's going to be a number. And it's more specifically, the reason why we did this is we are declaring CCs as well. So that's where you have your members' interest for the CCs built in. For NPCs, 99% of the time you're going to tick the control box. So the members' interest part was catered for in terms of the closed corporations. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any more hands? All right, I guess not. No, thank you for those comments and questions. I think as another mechanism of improvement that we will obviously give some mind to, we'll give some mind to is the efficiency of continuous reporting, especially when there's no changes. I think that's something that will obviously look into, as to, instead of capturing, if nothing has changed, perhaps we'll look at another way of how it is that we can make this compliance submission happen without obviously capturing all of that. So we will definitely look into that. We're moving quite nicely. At this point, we're gonna welcome to the podium our keynote for the day. Obviously, very insightful information that he would be able to share with us. With a very warm, remember this is keynote address. So based on how warm your claps are will depend as to his enthusiasm here when giving information to us. So with a very warm round of applause, could you please welcome Mr. Ishmael Momonate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Program Director, and thank you for inviting me. And to the Commissioner, I'm never too busy to come to these forums, because I think these forums are really important to get feedback. And for us, we're in a public sector, not just to talk to ourselves, okay? And to understand, I think, the impact. And let me congratulate the CIPC, because I think they've really done a sterling job through this grey listing exercise to get the beneficial ownership. And I think, Commissioner, the hard stop you have, it's a good mechanism, okay? Especially for us South Africans, because we always move last minute, okay? I might have the same disease, but you wait for the deadline and then you try, and there's got to be some slap on the wrist sometimes to push people to go there. So I think the CPC, and as you know, the BO legislation we had to do in 2022, because when the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, assessed our system in 2019 with what they call their mutual evaluation, it's a peer review, they found our system was defective from an anti-money laundering and terror financing perspective. Now, I don't want to focus too much on terror financing, because I think terror financing is more specific. And I do raise questions often, is what FATF expects us to do really proportionate? In a sense that someone who wants to commit an act of terror, remember, there's not terrorism, it's terror financing. That the person's hardly likely to run a big company or be on a radar screen from the formal channels or through the banking system, that they have so much money that you would notice, okay? It's different to money laundering. Money laundering is about money. So therefore, you're going to find it in their bank accounts. You're going to find it in transfers. You're going to find it in the structures that they have. People are going to try and hide, okay? And of course, let's forget about FATF. The issue is not to do these things because of FATF. The issue is to do it for ourselves. And as we know, in our country, unfortunately, corruption has become very entrenched, and so entrenched that it's become a way of life. And as the commissioner pointed out, and I see my colleague Tumelo here, I mean, it gets annoying. Every day there's a story. The CEO of IGT, cheaper, okay, this municipality, that municipality, allegations. And I think, frankly, to what extent are we complicit in making it easier for those people to get away with the crimes that they're committing? I think that's a big question we need to ask ourselves. Not saying we do so deliberately, but our systems may actually be promoting that. And I'm going to come back to that. So coming back to the beneficial ownership and the issue, and congrats, I think, on updating the system. And in fact, I think the CIPC actually has lessons, even for the master's office, certainly with NPOs. I'm glad there was a question on NPOs, social development to help them, because we are in a world today where you don't want people to hide under some corporate veil or some sort of structure. And the question is, why shouldn't the information be transparent? One of the questions, I think, was on people sort of worried about the information that they provide. My question is, what have they got to hide? Yes, there's some information that shouldn't be put out. Privacy of that person, you don't need to have the person's address and the person's very personal details. But a lot of other information needs to be made public. Now, I understand that in a society where crime is a huge problem, it may expose people to other risks, kidnapping risks, and so on. So one's got to try and design the system to deal with those types of fears that you have. So coming back to beneficial information and the hard stop, as I said, we had to do it for grey listing, to exit the grey listing. But the reason why we should be happy about it, we might have been forced to do that because we got grey listed, is to embrace the concept and to say, but actually it's a very good concept. So I say to Tumelo over there, you look at the customer supplier database for public procurement. That concept should be used for our procurement system. We should know ultimately who's behind every procurement. In my personal view, you give up your right to privacy if you're going to tender for in a public sector. Then I think a lot more should be made available about you. Shouldn't be a secret. Okay? And not just because of SARS. SARS wants to know you're running a business, and therefore they need to know that they've been that the taxes due are being dealt with, or that you're paying that. So the bigger question, I think, for us is beneficial ownership provides a base for transparency and good governance, and for us to understand what's really happening in the economy. Now, some countries, and we were just talking earlier, is they understand that maybe because of kidnapping risks and other risks, you don't want to open up the database to everyone. I think there should be a discussion about it, but generally in the public sector, I don't think the public sector, there's a culture to understand how much data we actually have. An example I would use is the health sector. Don't we want to know how many people use whatever clinic and hospital? Don't we want to know the people who go to a clinic or go to a hospital, what's their health profile? Did they go there for diabetes? Did they go there for ulcers, etc.? You don't need individual information because I think health information, there is a very strong case that people have the right to privacy on their health. But that doesn't mean that there's a right to privacy when you aggregate the info and it's anonymized so that we can actually use the data to see which clinics are busy, which clinics tend to do more teenage abortions, okay? That tells you teenagers are getting pregnant. There's a problem there. You need to target your programs in that area because you don't want teenage girls to get pregnant. Aside from the issues of statutory rape and all of the other social issues, you want young women to go through their education and improve their life prospects before they make decisions like when to have a child and so on. So I'm just trying to say the data itself is very important. And the bigger issue, I think, for the public sector is how do we make that information available? So if you look at with the CIPC, and in terms of legislation, we had to show that your law enforcement agencies have access to that information. Now, to have that as a reason through grey listing, when it shows that that's not happening, itself is shocking. You would think law enforcement would have access to all kinds of information very quickly. But actually, you find not. It will take them years to get information, even from within the public sector. Someone does procurement fraud, and they can't get that information because the people complicit hide the information. And when I ask the question, are we complicit? Because we forgot to put a rule to say all information around procurement should be stored somewhere so that the persons doing the procurement can't hide that information or conceal it or prevent others from getting access. So as a public sector, we need to understand the role of data and why it's so important to have it. And I think that the CIPC really does provide an example. Of course, the other side of the coin, so they've been great in getting the registry up. What are we sitting at now? 70%? Joey? Okay. We need to get to 100%, okay? Because we're almost certain to exit grey listing in October. We've done the work. But the issue that we've said to everyone is, yes, we can celebrate, but let's not celebrate that now we've fixed up our anti-money laundering system. We haven't, okay? All exiting the grey list shows is that we've got 33% and you've passed the subject. You still need to get 80% or 90 or 100. And so all we're showing is that we've started to put in place the systems to deal with that deficiency that was identified. So if you take the CIPC case, the one issue is to get the registration up. And by the way, it would apply to trusts as well. But the other issue is the information accurate? So we're going to have to look at those kinds of issues. But the other issue is, are the law enforcement authorities using that information? Because there too, not only do we have a poor approach towards making sure we have data, but we don't use the data, or certainly not in the public sector. I don't know why we're so daft, okay? But when we've been looking at some of the cases, the police will say, but for a year they're waiting for that info. And you say, but you just needed to do this and you can get this immediately. It's on a database. Or that it's, the law enforcement can get something quite easily. If there's a crime committed at an airport, why does it take a year to just get a list of all the cars that were at the airport at the time? If you go to ORT, and there was such a case, I said to the investigator, but you go to ORT, you park your car there, it registers your number plate. When you leave, remember there's those cameras, they're checking your number plate as well against your ticket. So surely you got a list of all that information. And people say, no, but XR doesn't keep the info. Now, I don't quite believe that story. But the question comes up, how long is such information stored? Because you may only find in a year's time that there was something committed on a particular day, and you want to be able to access that data. So I think that the CIPC certainly has modernized its system and can also, I think, go beyond just the beneficial ownership. I think to teach or to assist other entities. So as I said, and I'm just pulling XR just out of the blue, is you've got data about the cars that come in and out. You've got lots of cameras. You know who's at the airport. How long do you keep that data? Is it accessible by law enforcement? But as I said, the other issue is how do you modernize law enforcement so that the officers actually are routinely accessing that information? And it's not like a voyage of discovery and it takes them 1 year just to get the number plate. Okay. It gets quite frustrating, in fact, when you speak to the officers, and through this grey listing process, we work very closely with law enforcement. And issues like that came up. So what would come up is we would have to have case studies. And case studies that would say, you say, this is the crime that was committed. 4 months later, you got to report again. And initially, you put new cases, you forget about the old cases. And then they would come back and say, but what's happened to those old cases? And of course, nothing's happened, okay, in many instances. Go 4 months later, again, nothing's happened. So we started being critical with our colleagues and saying, but why does it take so long? No, we want this information. We want that information. And the problem is this department or this entity. Now, that already gets us to fail the test at FATF, because what are we saying? I was just saying earlier to the commissioner, you can't be a football club and say, the problem is our goalkeeper or our center forward. You must sort that out. Don't make that public and let the opposition know about it. Everybody can see where your weaknesses are. But then you're going to continue to lose. So as South Africa, we had to make sure that we stop using silly excuses like blaming another entity. Whilst that may be true, the issue of identifying a weakness is to fix it. And the question becomes, why didn't you fix it? And that's actually the bigger problem that you put forward. So I'm kind of raising this just to show and try and place how important I think, it just looks like a technical issue that we start putting beneficial ownership. And of course, more than a beneficial ownership, all the other information that you put up. And the challenges you're going to have is how accurate is that information. That's the next step. We need to discuss that. We need to get feedback. We need to get people to understand how to do it. So as an example, a bank has to do customer due diligence. And if it's an NPO or if it's a company, are they checking for the accuracy? And what happens when it's not accurate? Okay. There's a lot of power you have to say to your customer, go and fix it up with the CIPC. You can't have different information. And that lays the basis to put up suspicious transaction records as well. So I think the whole issue of how you improve that accuracy, I think, does come up. But more importantly, as we move forward, and I want to link it back to how do we fight crime? How do we fight? Money laundering is a very broad charge. And what we were told during grey listing, and by the way, it took many of us some time to understand that. FATF is not interested in you going after the Guptas. Not because they're not interested in you getting your Guptas. They're almost saying, what's wrong with your country? Someone robs you, we expect you to do something. Okay? Unfortunately, in the US, you have the same. People commit crimes, but if they're on this side of the political spectrum, they're not going to get prosecuted. Okay? The Department of Justice starts getting weaponized. Okay? Now, you can't have that in a system. So, what is FATF interested in? They're saying, we expect you to go for the Guptas or those perpetrating the crime, what's called those committing the predicate crime, the people actually committing the original sin. But what about all those people who helped? Who were the lawyers, the estate agents, the car dealers, the banks, or whoever, who assisted these people, who looked the other way? Was there a suspicious transaction filed? Okay. If not, why not? Like a parliamentary question. Okay. And I think that's where you learn much more. And that gets you. So Babita Tukaran was killed, clearly linked to tenders. And we get the people who actually killed her, the predicate crime. But who's behind that? I'm almost certain it was someone whose tender got blocked, okay, and then got the hitmen. And they're always men, so I don't have to, the hitmen are men, okay? So the question is, how do you actually get your system to be more curious? And that's when they say to us almost, but South Africa, what's wrong with you guys? Aren't you interested in getting the people behind the crime? And especially when you're dealing with organized crime, and we do have organized crime, it's become very strong. And a lot of this is due to state capture. I mean, we got grey listed because of state capture. Our organizations were weakened, especially our law enforcement. So the question becomes, why aren't you pursuing the people who assisted in the crime or facilitated the crime? Or what, if you look at our action item, it doesn't say that they wanted to see a sustained increase in investigations and prosecutions against serious and complex money laundering, but they wanted to see it for third-party money laundering. So third-party money laundering are the people who are behind the crime, the other beneficiaries, or the people who benefited from the crime subsequently, even if they were not behind the crime. So that's the spirit, I think, that we need to take. And really, it's not about FATF. We need to look at ourselves and say, what's wrong with us? Why aren't we going after them with great passion and actually making sure that there's consequences? So in that sense, I think, and I'm going to conclude, that I think what the CIPC has done is just the start of a process. That it's a process, I think, for more transparency. And the bigger questions we need to ask is not just, is the info accurate, but shouldn't it be accessible to more people? At the very least, if I still think the default should be, it should be made public. But even if it's not made public, other people who have legitimate interests, whether it's the sterling job done by journalists who do investigative journalism, they get to know the crooks well before we do in the public sector or in the law enforcement. And by the way, that's often because though we have the info, we don't do anything about it. So then it becomes a news story. And then we all kind of suddenly react. But we should have strong preventive systems to reduce the scope for such crimes. And that's hence my question, are we complicit when we don't have strong preventive systems? Are we complicit in aiding and abetting those crimes when we don't have more transparency? Are we complicit when we don't make that information available, say, to investigative journalists, or say to whoever has a legitimate interest and would help us in the fight against corruption? And the fight is important because corruption doesn't just rob people of services, but it's undermining our democracy. And if you don't watch it, you'll get strongman leaders come and say, we can solve the problem just by shooting everyone, okay? We can solve the problem by having the National Guard in Washington, okay? Those are military dictatorships if you don't watch it, okay? Democracy is important. I try and say to my son, you need to focus on why it's important to let people have a voice and why you have democracy. So I think for all of those things, it becomes an issue. Let me just leave a last issue. One of the issues that Joey can say here is he tried to show how we verify the IDs for beneficial ownership. Now that's easy if you're a South African and you can get to Home Affairs. But then you have someone who's a foreign person, and we want foreigners to invest in South Africa, so it's not in a negative sense. But how do you verify their ID? Because we may not have access, in most instances, to the Home Affairs equivalent in other countries. It becomes, by the way, even more of a problem in our neighboring countries. So it raises issues like, shouldn't we in the region, SADC, SACU, have an exchange of information related to IDs between the authorities? So I'm just trying to say, when you put in context the beneficial ownership in a broader context of improving governance, improving transparency, ensuring that we can fight crime and corruption, improving the system of accountability, it becomes, you can see how important this is. And that's why let's not worry that it's costly, too much to put in. The question is, how do we use it? And sorry, just one other information I've found when you deal with crimes. And I don't know how to solve the problem, but let me just put the problem. How do you know that X and Y are connected when they are directors? How do you know that X is married to Y? How do you know that X is somebody's father-in-law? You'd be surprised how many people chapo the tender system and put their parents on. The Guptas did it themselves. Imagine if the Gupta mother was put in jail. Okay? How ashamed they would feel, because there's consequences when you do that. So I don't know, Commissioner, how you deal with this, but how do we know naturally in our system, even aside from the questions that you ask about who the controlling share is behind, is there a way, and I'm told that you can get it through the National Population Database, but you may also have foreign persons who do this. How do you know? Because you can marry someone who's not South African as well, okay, as you know. how do you know that people are connected or not connected? So I think that the beneficial ownership is really a start. It provides a basis to expand, but there are hard questions to answer about transparency and so on. And there are lessons, as I said, whether it's AXA, whether it's the procurement system, the database, whether it's the health records. Not that in health you want to interfere, but I'm just saying that more broadly, I think that there are possibilities. So I think this might seem like a small step, but I think it's really a giant step towards getting a better society free of corruption if we use the fact that we have the database to build stronger preventive systems and to build systems that improve accountability, that get us more suspicious transactions because we can join the dots, as the late Praveen Gordon used to say. I think those are the possibilities, and that's why I think the CIPC has done a sterling job, but I think we must look at how do we use the system to do better. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Momoniat. I believe he gave a lot of food for thought. I think one takeaway from his intelligence he shared with us is the importance of making certain that information we collect is corrected, and also information we collect is able to be used by multiple other organizations, and just shows how central CIPC is in this process. With as much food for thought that he gave to us, are there any questions or comments in reflection of the keynote? Oh, there's one.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. Always great to hear from you, Uncle Momo. Walter here from SAICA. I think there's been a theme between you and the commissioner about those who operate outside the system. Because obviously, I think we all know that those who are complying obviously will always feel the pressure to make sure that they comply and all sorts of things. And I'm sure many have even complained here to say, hey, it's too much regulation for us. What about those outside the system? So my question is, how, during the FATF discussions, were the discussions on how to deal with those who are operating outside the system? Because you spoke about terror financing, for instance, that you won't necessarily have a bank account. And I think Krista spoke about others use a WhatsApp group. I didn't even know you can use a WhatsApp group to do terror financing. You know, that's how backward I am in that respect. So were those discussions, and is also for commissioners, it's something that CIPC is saying, okay, it's outside our system, therefore let's give it over to perhaps law enforcement. So it's just a question on that. Thanks.
I think that's the only question. Uncle Momo, would you be able to take that for us? The question? Oh, yes.
No, thanks, Walter. At least I see the face, and Walter was one of the people who helped us where to go and get our coverage up, especially on trusts and so on. Look, you know, FATF in grey listing doesn't discuss things. FATF, by the way, is not a great organization for discussion. And in fact, it's very, very technical, too technical. And some of the approaches then become a tick box approach, I think, okay? But that's why I say we must draw on what FATF has and interpret it in our context. Is it good for us as South Africa? And how do you need to tweak it, perhaps, often, so that it works for us? And the FATF viewers are hardly interested in the contacts and so on. So tick, tick, tick. Your coverage is too low. They're not interested in why the coverage is low. If you take with trusts, at least with the CIPC, they can see that there's an annual filing. So they can see the organization is active. You have SARS that can also come in and show that there's activity there and therefore something. It gets much harder when you look at trusts. Now, to make it difficult for ourselves, we included all trusts. And I don't have to tell you, they go back over 100 years, right? Some countries were cleverer and they said, we'll only take trusts from they'll have a date, a cutoff, 1990 or 2010 or whatever. And any others that are inactive if there's any tax activity. I think that's what the UK does. So and also then to assess, are those actually instruments high risk, whether it's for terror finance, whether it's for money laundering, so that you then focus on what are the high risks. So one of the mechanisms at FATF is to have a risk-based approach. And I think that really is again a tool that we can embrace. And let me say for law enforcement to embrace, because like the things they watch is, okay, you say, let's say kidnappings are high risk. Then they want to know from the police, how much resources do you put on kidnapping? Okay. Then they want to know, do you have training for... Now, that's silly stuff that we should have thought about ourselves, okay? What does it say about us that we didn't think about what training, and we say this is a priority and then we don't do it? And then I think they also look at things like how many suspicious transaction records have been filed related to kidnapping. If you say that's a high risk. And if your numbers are low, then they say, but are you enforcing your system? So there's no discussion, but I think the tools are there for us to take over, reinterpret for ourselves, and actually make sure that we are then more focused on dealing with the priority crimes we want to deal with. And the last point I would make, of course, is, we're facing a mutual evaluation next year, just by coincidence. It happens every 7-8 years. Our mutual evaluation was in 2019, but because of COVID, it only came out in, was it 2022? Okay. So we kind of knew the weaknesses, and that's why we could do the legislation and so on to try and address it, right? But FATF is not focused anymore on the legislation. That's a focus still, but more and more they focus on what they call effectiveness. So it's about implementation. And us South Africans are great at implementation, right? We're superstars, okay? So that's going to be our biggest problem, is have we continued to improve after grey listing, institution by institution? Is our effectiveness going up? And so it's not about your laws, it's about how you implement, and are you implementing? The other issue, by the way, that comes up, and I think that's going to be very difficult, is a focus on crypto. Are they regulated? Now, it's hard to regulate crypto, okay? It's got a cross-border approach element, very strong. Lots of young people like the fact that the government has no control over it or whatever. They don't realize it's then just as easy to cheat. And people will be cheated. If you look at the scams that you see on crypto, just coming in this morning, they warned young women and young men, 18 to 22. You get jobs like jobs in Thailand to do English, okay? You actually are part of, like, you force, once they get you, They put you in a place, you don't know the language, and you think you're free, but when you want to leave, you have problems. And if you don't make them monetary targets, they even beat people up. Okay? So it's a form of trafficking. We used to say, I know I'm going on, we used to say slavery is over. There's new forms of slavery. It's not, they don't put you in chains and so on necessarily, but there's new forms, and you mustn't be blind. You've got to open your eyes. And it requires, I think, for all of us, a lot more education and so on of people, because I think crypto and social media, I think, are really important. How many people read newspapers here? I won't embarrass you. But the reality is, unless you're an old fart like me or the commissioner, most people get their news today on social media. And of course, I don't have to tell you, the more you click on one type, the more you get of that, so it reinforces. So people actually don't get the news broadly and the risks that they face. So I don't have the solutions. We need younger people like you to come up with solutions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mumanate. I think there's one more question there at the back.
A very good morning. Thank you again. I only joined in when you were almost at the last part of your presentation. My name is Ria Nonyana Mokabane. I'm coming from the Triple BE Commission. I just want to check with you the approach, maybe from on the side of FATF, in relation to competing interests, or maybe shall I say competing legal rights, where you're dealing with the right to freedom of doing business, and particularly when you begin to use trusts in transactions. You would be made aware that parties to trust, they wouldn't want to necessarily disclose maybe what the entitlements are, and also in some instances who the beneficial owners are. On the other hand, we are caught up in implementing a legislation that requires you now, particularly with the amendments that we have already caused into trust, where we are required to ensure that there is open beneficial ownership. And on the other hand, parties would argue that we've got contractual freedom, and it's a fundamental constitutional right. You wouldn't know which right should balance the other, or which one should supersede the other. What would FATF's approach be in such an instant where we are confronted with competing rights? Thank you.
Short answer is no. Look, FATF doesn't look at those things. It's there for anti-money laundering, terror financing, and the other one now is proliferation finance. So they don't. But I think your broader issue of people feeling they have a right to privacy, you've got to balance that with, I mean, if you procure, why should you have a right to privacy? Okay. So we need to find appropriate disclosures and making information public, because the reality is that some people like to keep it quiet, because then they can continue with breaking the law. It doesn't mean everyone's doing it, obviously, but there's a trade-off, and any society needs to decide that that's it. And when I mention the other trade-off, it could very well be that you fear that your children may get kidnapped. Okay, so you don't want this to come out. But if you take the Scandinavian countries today, you know, even your tax affairs are accessible to the public. Can I tell you how ridiculous it gets? I'm going to go and do a tour of one of our airport, and to try and see how do we check against people who take money out of the country physically. Okay. One of the officials said to me, because when you leave, we only have the simple metal detectors. If you go overseas, now in many countries they have those round ones where you put up your hand, whatever. And the person's not a lawyer, but he says, no, for constitutional reasons, and we've got those, we've got 2 at ORT. We don't use that. Now, everybody uses the Constitution, but unless they've gone to senior counsel and got a proper legal opinion, that's not the issue. But we are also holding back our development by not doing this. So, not fully answered. I mean, FATF is not concerned about anything beyond, as I said, money laundering and making sure that, and remember, the only reason you join FATF is because if you don't, your banks will be deemed high risk. The cost of doing correspondent banking will increase. You won't be able to trade. You won't be able to buy an iPad or cell phones that are not made here, etc., etc. So I'm not a lawyer, but one thing I've learned, when people say the Constitution is this, that, I take it with a pinch of salt, because I think the Constitution is about balancing different rights. And how do you balance those rights? I mean, with the law enforcement, I went to I think last week, I was speaking to some of them. I say, but someone has committed murder, rape, and violent rape, and they get bail. And then they come back and they commit the same crime, and we are surprised. So is the right of someone who commits a crime to be not regarded as guilty or be regarded as innocent until found guilty. But what does that mean for bail? And is it just a question of the risk of flight risk? Isn't it more important to look at the person maybe harming people? So I don't have the answers, but I don't buy the story that the Constitution says this is the only way. I think you've got to balance the rights and deal with those issues. So the issue of competition is important, but it's not something that FATF is going to look at.
Thank you for that, Mr. Momonia. I think with just those comments, it just shows how integral transparency is, especially when it comes to business, how transparency should necessarily be pushed at all costs. And I think with CIPC being at the center of company data, we cannot ignore those how deep these declarations actually go. But one other element that I believe came out from Mr. Mumaniat's intelligence that he shared with us is, and I believe the Commission also touched on it, this data needs to be used. It's all good and well that we collect it, but if it's not used, it's as good as nothing. So it's really important for it to be used. And I think he touched that, obviously at this point, law enforcement does have access to the data, and obviously seeing and hoping much more visible traction taking course on that side to show how important and how treasurable this kind of information is. At this point, we're gonna call again upon our Commissioner, Advocate Rorivola, to just offer us our closing remarks. Commissioner.
Well, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much, Momo. We always enjoy listening to you, speaking especially with a lot of passion when it comes to the issue of how do we deal with transparency issues and the multitude of corruption allegations we have in the country. I was saying to Momo on a side issue that hopefully when we get some good news in October, I think he needs 6 months of rest. He's been at this for 3 years now. And I think he's doing an absolute great job. He's been leading the charge. Momo has been at the forefront of our grey listing challenge. And I think that putting together a multitude of regulators and changing of legislation, omnibus bills, is not an easy task. And I think that together with his leadership and bringing all of us together has really been really great. So we really do appreciate that. But the one thing that he touched on, which I hopefully also want to leave with you, and we at CIPC are thinking very hard about this, is that where do we take this to now? Because there has to be another step of maturity, right? It's all well and good getting the data. It's all well and good getting rubbish data. All right, so I, for one, do not know that all the data that I'm receiving at the CIPC is very credible. I'll be honest with you. So how do we move to the next state and the next step of making sure that we have some verification and authentication and usage of bringing all of this data together? Now, this is where I want to pose something a bit controversial, right? And I've been saying this for a while, is that for a while now, us in government, this grey listing issue has been seen, well, this is maybe according to me and it's my own opinion, people can agree or disagree. It has been seen as a government failure and as a government problem. I've always said this is a South African problem, okay? It's a government, it's a public and private sector problem. Because as long as we remain within the grey listing issue, within the FATF, it affects everybody, right? It affects our whole outlook, economic outlook, lending, all of that becomes affected and impacted by it. And therefore, the private sector needs to play its part. The one private sector institution that I'm specifically referring to, and I've always referred to it, and I know I've had many, many arguments about this and many, many discussions about this, is that where does the banking institutions play a large part in all of this? Because banks receive first-line data, and they receive a lot of data, all right? And where do they pick up discrepancies? I'll tell you a funny story, a little anecdotal story. The other day, I don't know what was I doing. I decided to watch Scarface. I don't know if you've seen the movie Scarface, right? I was a little lighty when I first saw it, so I decided, let me watch this movie again, Tony Montana. And the one part that I started laughing at, and I'm thinking, gee whiz, we should show this to the banks, is that Tony walks in and his group walks into the bank with these bags of money. I mean, you've seen the movie Scarface, right? They're walking with bags and bags of money, and then it shows the bank manager looking all very excited. And then it jumps and it goes to a few more minutes, and then it shows the bags getting more and more and more. And the one thing that the bank manager eventually does is he calls Tony Montana into a meeting and he says, you know, Tony, with all this money you're bringing me, I'm going to have to charge you more fees, man. You never asked where the money came from. The drug money. All right? He never asked. He says, no, Tony, you need to charge you more now, because you are starting to bring us way too much money. Meaning that they have the data, but they don't ask the right questions, right? And it has in South African context as well. We keep talking about discrepancy reporting, and we're going to move on to that very soon as part of our maturing level, is that we need to start asking, as far as where do we take this data to, and how do we strengthen and enforce our BO system? How does the private sector play a part in picking up all of that? Yes, it is there. We know that. We know that they have reporting of their own. Is it sufficient? We don't know. Are we going to triangulate it and use some of that data? We don't know. Because we've been trying to do it, but all we seem to get is, well, Pius says this and no, law says that. But at the end of the day, we have to all play our part. So follow the money is very important in all of this. And therefore, we can see how best we can deal with it. So the impact is everybody's problem. We need a national concerted effort to deal with it. We have dealt with it to a certain level. But as Momo said, and as Joey keeps reminding me, is that this is only step one. Step two is they're going to come all the time to make sure that what you've said and what you've committed, you are keeping your word at it. So once they remove us, hopefully, they're still going to come and say, okay, well, now you've done all these wonderful things. Show us how you continue to maintain the system that you have developed. Not only us, remember, it's a whole host of regulators. And especially when it comes to issues around prosecution, we need to show that our systems are working by getting more people prosecuted. And I'm not saying that we must go into the streets and arrest people. I'm saying that when the systems show that there is something deficient or there is illegal activity, we use that might in order for us to bring those to book. That's what it says. And Patrick will continue to say, how many prosecutions do you have? I've sat in many of these meetings with Shamila, Patoy, and stuff like that, where they ask these questions, show us the stats. How many people have you prosecuted for money laundering? Have you used the PO system? They've asked these questions. Have you accessed the CIPC PO system in your investigations? They asked us of the attorney profession. They asked us of the real estates and the estate agencies. Imagine walking there with a big bag of money and saying, I'm going to buy a house in Camps Bay. All right? And there's only $100 bills, 100 rand notes. All right? These are the type of things we need to move on to the maturing level that I'm talking about. And therefore, we have to continue to strengthen our systems. So investigating, prosecution, strengthening of the South African government's governance landscape, making sure that the data is fully utilized. As myself and Mono, we keep talking about the usage of this data, all right? It has to be strengthened across all regulators in the private sector. And I'm very passionate about this, as many of you know. And therefore, we need to continue to make sure that we have not only the compliance level that we want, but also the continuing of a strengthening, enhanced, and improved environment for all us South Africans. So thank you very much. We said we're not going to be long. We aren't. Please stay with us. I think we got some refreshments and continue some discussions amongst yourselves. We also look forward to feedback, how to make the system better. It's one thing I keep saying, and maybe I'm repeating myself, we don't always get it right. Neither do we claim to always get it right. We like to listen to people who use the systems, and we like to listen to industry and stakeholders to say, well, this doesn't really work. Maybe you should change this, or this is how you can make it better. And therefore, we will certainly take all of those comments to heart and to make sure that we continue to serve all of you. So thank you very much for making the time.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I won't add much to that. I'll just give you logistics from now on. You know, if you fly on a flight and you land early, they say it's good performance. So I guess we are pretty much well ahead of time. We'll now be proceeding, obviously, outside to take some of these conversations, obviously, into discussions. So don't run off, because I believe we closed your diary till 12 o'clock. So we will make use of that full time. But after taking those conversations and networking outside, we would like to offer you lunch around 12 o'clock. We will move downstairs and break bread together. Thank you very much for coming, and safe travels. Thank you very much.